Welcome to the second week of the Vikings. This is week 2, and our lecture tonight is on, or our lectures are lectures 3 and 4, Viking material culture. Let's see if I have that centered. Okay, there, that looks better. Viking material culture. Before I get started, I want to ask the class a couple of questions here. First of all, are you able to get on the website all right? Is everybody getting on the website? Anybody having problems getting on the website? Okay.
I don't have any information about the website yet.
Okay, is that Carl? Is that Carl?
No, my name's Chris. No, this is Chris Brown.
Chris
Cinco
Brown.
Ranch.
Chris Brown and Cinco Ranch. Okay. Chris and everyone else, we have a WebCT site, and in fact, I have some pictures of it. This is what it looks like right now. In black and white. It's actually in color on the website. It's a WebCT site, and you need a password to log on. You can get information on how to do that by calling 713, and I'll write that down, 713-743-1411. If you have any problems logging onto that WebCT site, usually they give you your initial password is your birth date, and you type it in, and then once you get into the website, then you can change that password to anything you want it to be. So far on our website, we have the syllabus, which I might make some changes to at this point. We have announcements with the hand of God, giving the announcements to you. We put notes in there. These two are notes from me. Here's a note from Libby down here. You can click on this to see the syllabus, and you can print that out. You can click on lecture notes, and that will take you to another site, and it will look like this. Okay. If I can turn the page. Okay, when you click on lecture notes, you will see lecture 1 and lecture 2 from last week. That was the first hour, and that was the second hour. Lectures 3 and 4 I put together, which will be the 2 lectures for tonight, but they're really all on material culture, so I couldn't see exactly where they would divide, so I just put them all together. And then next week, lectures 4 and 5 will either be there together or separately, however I do that. Okay, then you probably want to click back on home here, and you will go back, and here is a list of primary sources, and it's a very long list of primary sources, all of these books which you can get in the library. It's not comprehensive because, lo and behold, I made this list last year, and then I was talking to a publisher this fall, and she sent me a whole bunch of new books, new translations of Viking sagas. So as soon as I get time, I'll make the list of the new sources and add it somewhere here so that you will know what those new sources are. And probably tomorrow or the next day, I'm going to put on a guideline for the term paper for you to get started on that. Okay, so you'll have a guideline. But we'll be adding to this all the time, so check it every week. And one of the good, I should have printed some of this out, but one of the things about the lecture notes is you can print them out before class, and then you can have them right in front of you as I go through the lecture, and you can make notes right on them so that you can, it'll make the note taking a little bit easier. Okay, so Chris Brown, where were you, Chris, now again? You were in?
Cinco Ranch.
Cinco Ranch, okay. Okay, and then I think that we had 4 others who were in West Houston: Terry Stewart and Michael Learzer, Emily Alter, and Carl Davis. Are you all out there?
Just Terry Stewart.
Terry Stewart, okay. Is your group of 4 there?
No, they're not. I don't recognize anyone that was here last time.
Oh, okay.
I don't know what happened.
All right, so we've got some new people out in Cinco Ranch who were not here last time, right?
Actually, there's only 2 of us here, and I'm the only one that's here now, that was here last week.
Okay,
So
okay.
we're missing 3.
You're missing 3. Okay, they might be late. They might have decided to drop, whatever the case may be. Anyway, I have all your emails, and I emailed you all back thanking you for sending me your emails. Terry, did you get an email from me?
No, ma'am, I haven't, and I'm having trouble getting on the WebCT site as well. I've tried to log on, not log on, but just access it, and it tells me that it's still under construction.
It does. Everybody else
Maybe I'm going to the wrong place.
Maybe you're going to the wrong place because everybody else here is getting on it all right. So listen, call that number and ask them what's going on and what you're doing wrong, and they'll talk you through it. Okay?
Okay, will do. Thanks.
Okay, so that you can get on. I'm not going to have a whole lot of notes tonight. Mostly what I'm doing is pictures and illustrations and discussion. So you should, without the notes in front of you, you should do all right from just my notes that I'm going to show on the air. All right, do we have anybody else off-site? We heard from the Cinco Ranch people. Anybody else at one of the off-campus sites? I see somebody else out there. Sugarland? 2 in Sugarland, okay. I don't think we have anybody in North Houston, do we? Nobody in North Houston? Anybody else on the off-campus sites? I didn't bring my list with me. I'm sorry tonight. Is there somebody else out there? Okay. Well, what I want to emphasize to all of you on the off-campus sites in Cinco Ranch and Sugarland is please feel free to participate in the class just like the students in the classroom do, and you can ask questions, you can make comments, and we hear you really loud and clear when you make a comment so that I'll be able to stop and listen to you. Okay, so I wanted to clarify that. There's another little bit of, I think another little bit of paperwork here. Here is our textbook, Elsa Rosedal, The Vikings, and you're supposed to read up to about, you're supposed to have read to about 147 tonight, and I'll be covering a lot of that material on the Vikings. Our book, The Emergence of the Rus, seems to be out of print. How many of you have been able to get hold of it? Has anybody gotten The Emergence? Okay, some of you have The Emergence of the Rus. Yeah, do you have it?
I thought I did.
You thought you did. Okay. All right. It's on Amazon.com. So one of the students told me you can get it from Amazon.com. What I'm going to do is substitute one of the recommended books, or optional books, Women in Old Norse Society by Jenny Jockins. But I'll give you a choice. You can read either this, but if you can get hold of The Emergence of the Rus and you'd rather read that one, you can. Okay? So, be sure, if I add any more books, be sure to check the website for the latest information about the required books. Okay? So you now have a choice, and I'm going to change the reading assignments on the syllabus to reflect this one, Women in Old Norse. This is a great book, by the way, so that you can read this if you can't get The Emergence of the Rus. I'm going to mention a couple of books that I'll be using parts of tonight and next week and throughout the course. I use a lot of illustrations in this class, and the illustrations I use, of course, are copyright free, so that we don't have any legal problems. The books I'm using for a lot of the illustrations are, this is a 2-volume set, The Viking Age by Du Chailly, and here is the cover page here. It's copyrighted 1889, if you can see that, so that it's all right to use on the air. And I think it says there it has 1,366 illustrations and maps, so you can see I have a gold mine here of illustrations to show you about various things. And I see one I wish I had copied for today. This is volume 2. There are 2 volumes to the set. So I'll be using a lot of things from these books. And I will also use a few things from this book. This is a really nice book, Cormac the Skald, which is a Viking saga that is also a copyright-free book. And it's kind of neat. I actually took my my little illustration that I use at the beginning. I used the frame from this for that, and I'll be using a few of the pictures from that tonight. And when we do Iceland, this saga takes place in Iceland, so I'll be using this a lot with Iceland. I wanted to mention a couple of other really good books. Well, maybe really good. Okay, I'll use a bit of information from Kirsten Hallstrup's Culture and History in Medieval Iceland. Last week, one of the things I told you about was the difference of opinions among the Scandinavian people. The Danes are really into runes and archaeological work, and they really don't like to use the sagas much. The Icelanders really like the sagas. The Icelanders really like the sagas because most of the sagas were written in Iceland, and the Norwegians and the Swedes are somewhere in between, and that's where I sort of fall too. When I went to Denmark a few years ago, I asked my Danish friends if they liked this book, and they didn't. I guess I'm not really crazy about this book either, but it does have some useful bits of information in it. It's an anthropological analysis of structure and change, and it takes a somewhat different approach. I'm not sure I like some of the things she does, but some are okay. And then I want to mention this book, which I use extensively. This is one of my favorite books, A History of the Vikings by Gwyn Jones. And I really like this book. I don't use it as a textbook because it's kind of too long, you know, and I couldn't assign many other books if I just used this one, because it's extremely comprehensive, but I highly recommend it. Elsa Rosedal is good too. The Danes don't care for Gwyn Jones because he uses the sagas a lot, so you know, there is that difference of opinion. So I wanted to mention some of the books that I use as sources. I draw on a lot of different books in giving the lecture. Okay, last week we looked at the background to the Vikings. In lecture 1 we did an overview of the course and we really looked at course mechanics. In lecture 2 we looked at the background to the Vikings, and we looked at them as Indo-Europeans who came from this area of Central Asia, in the Caucasus Mountains, and they were only one group that went into Scandinavia, and all these other Indo-Europeans went into Europe and the Mediterranean lands and India, Persia, into China, and actually a bunch of them actually went to Siberia, but actually there is a people in the northernmost island of Japan that is partly Caucasian in that area. They're called the Hairy Ainu, and they're Caucasian. So Indo-Europeans got that far. It's really kind of incredible in their travels in the ancient world and the way they spread out. And focusing down closer, the Germanic tribes who filled in Europe, here are their routes of march as they went into Europe from Scandinavia as the Roman Empire changed. I don't want to say it fell, because the Roman Empire didn't fall. I like to say it morphed. It just, a feature here changed, a feature there changed, and pretty soon by 500 AD it wasn't Rome anymore. But the Germans kind of thought it was Rome, and being on the Roman border for 500 years, they were pretty Romanized anyway by that time. And so the German kingdoms, the kings thought of themselves as consuls of the Roman Empire. I mean, they thought of themselves as kings under the emperor, who was headquartered in Byzantium in the Eastern Roman Empire. So here are the Germans as they broke off from the Scandinavian people and moved southward, all those German tribes. And then they settled in this area that we have that's green here, where all the Germanic tribes settled. And this pink area is the Roman Empire. Under Justinian, he tried to reconquer the West and failed. And eventually the empire that we call Rome or Byzantium or the Eastern Roman Empire, it is just confined to this area right here. And this, obviously, the Persian Empire is here. This is before Islam, so it's before the 600s at this time period where we have all these Germanic states. And what happened is these Germans were converted to Christianity, and when they were converted, their culture changed. And over a period of time, it changed rather radically, so that by the time the Germanic tribes were side by side with the Vikings, they thought of the Vikings as not their ancestors at all, but as an utterly different culture, and so they thought of themselves as being quite different from the Vikings. And the Vikings, I don't know that the Vikings thought they were different from the Europeans. We don't really have information on what they thought, but we know that the Germanic peoples felt that the Vikings were barbarians that were alien from them. Okay, that's the air conditioner coming on. Okay, so now we're going to focus even more closely on Scandinavia. And here we have Scandinavia. This map is from our book on by Du Chaillet, and it has Viking names on it. It has, this is Jutland here, or Jutland is the correct pronunciation of it, and Denmark, and Norway, Sweden. Uppsala is one area of Sweden, Gautaland, and there's an area actually called Viking here, Finland, Trondheim, Hålogaland, and Finnmark up here, and this is Eastland, which is what the Vikings would have called it, and Kurland is here. Gardariki is mentioned, and Holmgard is mentioned in the sagas, so to give you an idea where these places are. All right, the first thing we want to look at when we look at the material culture of the Vikings is the environment, and I want to read you a little description from one of the Viking sagas that describes the environment. Okay, this is the Hervarar saga, and this has a kind of a geographical description of Scandinavia. The round of the world on which men dwell is much cut by the sea. Large seas stretch from the outer sea round the earth into the land. It is known that a sea runs from Njorvasund, which is the Straits of Gibraltar, all the way up to Jorsala land, the land of Jerusalem. From it, a long bay runs northeast called the Black Sea, which separates the three parts of the world. The part east of it is called Asia, but the one west of it is called Europa by some and Ania by others. North of the Black Sea is the great or the cold Sweden. Some say that Sweden is no smaller than Sörkland, the land of the Saracens. Some say she is as large as Blaland, the land of the blue or black men. The northern part of Sweden is uninhabited on account of frost and cold, as the southern part of Blaland is on account of the sun's burning heat. In Sweden there are many large herods or districts. There are also many kinds of people and many tongues. There are Asar, Duergar, and blah men, which would be blue or black men, and many kinds of strange people. There are beasts and dragons wonderfully large. From the north, in mountains which are beyond all settlements, a river springs that flows through Sweden. Its right name is Tanais. It was in old times called Tanaquissel or Vanakvissel. It flows into the Black Sea. The land round Vanakvissel was then called Vanaland or Vanaheim, home or world of the Vanir. This river separates the 2/3 of the world. East of it is Asia, and west of it is Europa. A large mountain ridge runs from northeast to southwest. It separates Sweden the Great from other lands. South of the mountain, not far off, is Turkland. There Odin owned a great deal of land. At that time the chiefs of the Romans went widely about the world and conquered all nations, and many chiefs on that account left their lands. Okay, then it sort of goes on and talks about Odin, and this is a sort of heroic saga. Odin, of course, is the chief god of the Vikings, and this is a heroic story about Odin, which treats him as a hero, a real human being who really lived. It's a kind of interesting saga. As Odin was foreknowing and skilled in witchcraft, he knew that his descendants would live in the northern part of the world. Then he set his brothers Vili and Ve to rule Asgard. He left and all the Djar with him and many folk. First he went westwards to Gardariki, then southwards to Saxland. He had many sons. He became owner of land at many places in Saxland, and left his sons to defend Saxland. Then he went northwards to the sea and settled on an island. That place is now called Odensea, or Odin's Island, in Fien. Then he sent Gefjon northwards across the sound to discover lands. She came to Gylfi, and he gave her one ploughland. Then she went to Jotunheim, and there got 4 sons by a Jotun. She changed them into oxen, and harnessed them to the plough, and drew the land out to sea, and westwards opposite to Odensea, and the land is called Sealand. She afterwards lived there. Okay, so we see a sort of portrait of a chieftain handing out the lands as he conquers, and he hands out the lands to his followers. This is clearly mythological, and it's a heroicization of Odin as a human being in a heroic kind of mode, which treats him as a real historical character. But we can get a little idea of the geography of the North and the environment. And one of the things about Scandinavia is there are problems of survival. I mean, it is a land of ice and snow and high mountains, and the description that I just read you is correct. There is a ridge of mountains down the middle of the Scandinavian peninsula that divides Norway from Sweden. And so high mountains, ice, snow, forest. It's heavily forested with pinewood forests, but also soft woods, especially with oak and elm and ash trees. And there are steep valleys and craggy peaks. It's a land of isolation, and because it's a hard land and a rocky land, and most of it can't be farmed, that means that the population was very sparse, and people did not live in towns. They tended to live in isolated farms where you had a kind of extended family living in a fairly isolated farm, maybe in a valley where there was just enough land that could be cultivated for the family itself. And so isolation was a problem. There are lots of problems. Survival is a problem, and the winters are very dark. They last a long time. It's the land of the midnight sun, and so you might only have a few hours of daylight in midwinter. this time of year now, so that you might only have a few hours of daylight, and the winters were long and the summers were short. I don't know that the long days in summer necessarily compensated for the short days in winter or not. And one of the interesting things about the land, and I'll show you some maps in a moment, is that it's all cut up with lots of waterways along, especially along the coast of Norway. There are deep fjords that go far inland, and there are rivers and streams and lakes everywhere, and all along the coastline in the fjords there are lots of islands, and so water is a very prominent feature. Even in the winter, when of course the streams would be frozen, but the water is just everywhere. Scandinavia is honeycombed by waterways. Survival was hard because it was so cold, and it was hard to grow food, and it wasn't hard to hunt food. One of the things about the forested areas is the wildlife was incredibly abundant. There was lots and lots of wildlife, and because of those waterways, there was tons of fish. But what would be the psychological effect of such an environment? And any ideas from any of you? Yeah.
Depression?
I would think that in winter there would be a problem of depression. You know, modern scientific studies show that the lack of sunlight, it does cause depression. Any other problems you can think of? I mean, being holed up all winter long for maybe, 8 or 9 months, it would cause depression. Of course, they went out in the snow. I mean, they didn't stay inside. They went out in the snow. And that didn't stop them. But any other problems you can think of?
There'd be
Could you press your mic? Sorry.
there'd be a lot of conflict probably among the family members, especially if it was a rather large extended family living together.
Okay, there might be a lot of conflict just from the close quarters, and in fact, I don't know that there's a lot of conflict within the family, but certainly the retainers they would have there, and the men who went out together to hunt and fish together, there are plenty of records of, fighting going on among them, and disagreements and quarreling. Yeah. Any other problems you can think of that this kind of an environment might cause for them? Yeah.
I can think of maybe a positive, that the harsh living conditions would add to a rugged individual who's willing to go out and find new atmospheres that they might want to live in.
Yeah, okay. There are positive things too. That's a very good conclusion to draw from it, that you do have a lot of rugged individuals, and that's what characterizes this culture a lot, because it takes so much to survive. I mean, you have to be really strong to survive. Disease, in this kind of an environment, disease takes a greater toll. And so only the strongest would survive in this kind of an environment. Alcoholism is a problem. Alcoholism is a problem in the northern lands. It still is to this day that suicide is a problem in this, in modern Scandinavia, as it was during this time. Did you have a comment?
Yeah, it kind of makes me think that maybe they had conflicts between certain groups. If one group's living area was probably not as good as another's, they'd probably be persuaded to go and take it from them, maybe, perhaps.
Okay, yes, you're absolutely right on that, and we'll see how they solve that. That is a problem for them, and we'll see next week how they solve that very problem. But there are these problems with the, how about communication? I mean, because people live in isolated places, and the winter, sort of confines them for the winters. It confines them being snowbound in their regions that they're in their areas. So communication between different regions of Scandinavia is at first a problem. Later on, they solve that one too. this is an environment that causes a lot of problems. I kind of like this map I wanted to show you. This is not Scandinavia, but this is rather northwestern Iceland. And I took this map out of Cormac the Skald because it's really quite characteristic of Norway and all the Scandinavian lands that the Norwegians settled, that the Scandinavians settled in. You can see many, many deep fjords, and the coast of Norway just looks like that all down the coast of Norway. Deep fjords here, and can you see, I don't know how well you can see these rivers, but there are just, I mean, maybe I can draw some lines on them, that these rivers go in like this, and here's another river, and another river, and more rivers. I mean, there's just it's just honeycombed with rivers. There are so many rivers that you can trace them all here. There's another river here and one here, and just the waterways go everywhere, so that you can see these fjords with all the rivers that feed into it and set the environment. Okay, and here are some pictures of what the environment would look like. Here you can see the mountains in the background and the forested hills. This is actually a Viking grave in the foreground here with a marker stone, but I was more focused on the landscape in this one. And this one, you can see a fjord coming in. Again, this is a grave with a mound on it, but here you see the fjords and the waterways and a little ship. The mountains rising up when you're in this steep valley. This is another great Viking grave. And here would be, we saw a lot of pine trees, but here are the hardwood forest trees that grow in that area. The elm and the oak and the ash are the main ones. And here we see the pine wood forest, the pine and the mountains rising in the background. Another mound, a burial mound with a marker stone on it, and the piney woods forest here within a sacrificial ring. And we'll look at the religion and what these things are. And then again, we see the mountain environment, and then we have the hardwood trees and the piney forests along here. Here are some more markers. This is a photograph, and it's a land of ice and snow. This actually is in Denmark, and it's in Jelling, which is a very, very famous Viking site in Jelling. The Jelling stone is there, and this is a mound, which is the grave of Gorm the Old, and it's a very tall mound. And while I was there in March, and I should have shown you the before picture. The night before, there was hardly any snow. It was very spring-like, and then there was a big snowstorm that night, and this is the snow all covering everything the next morning. And it got worse and worse as the day went on, and I thought, oh, I better get out of Jelling. I had been there for a couple of days. I thought, I better get out of Jelling or I'm going to get snowed in. And I was giving a talk at the University of Aalborg the next day, and I thought, I'd better get up there. And I was going around by train, and all the trains were delayed, and I stood on the platform with the snow blowing all day long, and I felt like a real Viking. Battling the elements, dragging my suitcase through the streets and the heavy snow drifts. But here we have the ice and snow of the place, and here is a picture of a fjord. Now this is a fjord in Denmark, and Denmark is quite different, whereas Sweden and Norway especially is very mountainous, and all the fjords along the coast, and I'll show you in a minute exactly where those are. In Sweden, there is more land that can be cultivated in very limited kinds of plains. Denmark is flat and not mountainous at all. It's almost completely flat, but it still has fjords. Can you see the fjord that comes all the way in here? And here is that spit of land that goes out and defines what the fjord is. And this was before it snowed, obviously, so that there's no snow here. But it was a kind of a kind of foggy day. I mean, it wasn't bright sunshine at all. Here is a map that shows these fjords, and they're far deeper and more penetrating along this coast of Norway than this map shows. There are places around this area, and here are the place names of different places. Yater is down here, and it's a little bit hard to read. Son is here, Trondeland is up here. I'm sorry, I can't read that one. And Warmland is here, Norland is here, Upland is here, Svealand, Gotaland, Smalaland, Åland and Gotland are islands, and sorry I can't read that. Skane is here, Zealand is this island, Jutland is this island, and Finn is this island in the middle. So we have Jutland, Finn, which is an island, and Zealand, which is an island, which makes up Denmark. And Denmark is flat and can be cultivated very extensively. The ridge of mountains goes here, and Norway is very mountainous, and this region in here, there are a lot of fjords in here, but this region in here has valleys and meadows that can be farmed, so there's more farming going on in Sweden in that area. Okay. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself here. Okay. Technology from archaeological sources. What is the material culture? What is the technology? Pottery, obviously. Pottery, most Stone Age and ancient peoples invent pottery fairly quickly. One of the interesting things about the Vikings is, as I looked at pottery and as I looked for pictures of pottery for this class and remembered the museums I saw in Denmark, the Vikings didn't do a whole lot with pottery. I mean, the pottery is fairly primitive. It's almost as if they jumped to metalworking very quickly, and they didn't spend a lot of time developing the pottery. So they didn't really depend on pots very much, but they moved to metalworking very quickly, and there's just far more bronze, pots, and art and jewelry. Metalworking becomes a major skill. Metalworking is a very important development in Viking life, and they really put an emphasis on it, and so we have much more bronze than we do pottery. Now, is that because the pottery got broken? It doesn't survive? Well, no. I mean, if they made enough of it would survive. But they made so much more bronze, and then when they invented iron in the Iron Age, then we have, this is a major advance, especially in weapons, and so pots were made out of iron and lots of weapons. From the beginning of Viking culture, they had boats. From the very beginning, they always had boats, and from the earliest time, when we go back to those rock carvings we saw last week, we see boats everywhere. Naturally, in that kind of an environment, they would have boats. Another thing they're really good at is woodworking, and they have all those forests around them, and so wood is a natural material around them, and they make use of it to a very large extent. They make wagons out of it. They make the boats out of it, of course, wagons, and they make a lot of furniture out of wood. They make a lot of wood things, a lot of wood carving. They make their houses of wood at first, or later on they make them out of turf. And the areas where they make them out of turf are areas where there are no trees, like Iceland. I mean, there were trees in Iceland, but they've cut them all down really fast, and so now there are no more trees in Iceland. But in areas where there were no trees, they made their houses of turf, which would be sod, which they kind of stacked up. Okay, here is pottery, and it's not that I didn't take a lot of pictures of pottery, but there just wasn't very much, and it's very primitive pottery. I mean, it's not well developed, I don't think. I found some cinerary urns of pottery where they cremated people and they put the ashes in them, but they didn't use a lot of pots. Now here is a bronze kettle, and obviously well used. It looks like it's been used a lot. 1/10 the real size, found up with the Gokstad ship. And they also used wooden plates and carved drinking cups, and so their utensils were wooden. I mean, they didn't use pottery. Maybe because on a long voyage the pottery was too fragile. Do you think maybe that's why? And again, we don't know why. We're just making some guesses here. But look at the bronze pots, and these are quite huge bronze pots. They're quite large, and these are in the museum in Copenhagen, and they're very ornately decorated, and they're very beautifully made, very sophisticated. Look at the fine detailing on these handles. So there's beautiful bronze pots, and this is a silver pot. When they can work metal, actually silver is easier to work than bronze. They probably had silver before they had bronze, and this is an utterly gorgeous bowl. It's huge. It's very, very large. Maybe they did human sacrifices in it or something, but you can see the fine quality of the metalworking on the side, these masts that are here. And then inside we can see these figures that are quite like the figures in the rock carvings, in fact. And this may date from a similar era. And so they just go all out with the metalworking. Here are some examples of bronze work, a fibula of gilt bronze ornamented with walrus tusk and garnets. From the later Iron Age, and you can see the ornate decoration on it. Here's a bronze ornament that's gilded, set with glass, found with glass beads. And again, you see the heavy ornamentation, a bracelet of massive gold. Down here, we can move that up here, the bracelet of massive gold, and a fibula with filigree work on it. When we talk about art, we'll get into more of the artistic styles, but I just want to show you the variety of metalwork and the sophistication of the metalwork. Here's a fibula of bronze with gold and silver ornament on it, a fibula of bronze from Zealand, and a fibula of bronze from down here from Bjornholda. And again, you can see the sophistication of the metalwork. There are hoards of gold coins, and in fact, quite early in their history, they started minting coins. And of course, coins were minted on the continent. The knowledge of minting coins originated with the Greeks, and then the Romans took it up, and so they had examples of Greek and Roman coins, and then Germanic coins like from Frankland and from France and Germany and England. And so they knew about minting coins, and they had all these foreign coins. There are still huge hoards of coins that are found in that area, so they would have lots of coins from their trade. And the main Viking coins we have are from the city of York, which in England, and they minted their own coins. But then early in the kingdoms, they minted their own coins. So here are some gold coins from a coin horn. Here is, the writing is upside down here because they made this picture upside down, but here you can see an iron pot. And when they learned to work with iron, this opened up a world of possibilities to them, looking at their material objects. And this is a cooking pot, of course, and iron is harder and more durable than bronze. Of course, it rusts, so I would prefer bronze myself to iron, but they did use iron cooking pots. But the weapons, iron is harder. Bronze is soft and it bends and it dents, and so the weapons were where iron gave them a huge advance. So here are some weapons made of iron. A throwing spear. This spear is 10 feet long. Here's a spearhead, and so this would be, you can see how long it is. You can compare it to this one. It would be that proportion to the handle. And here's a leaf-shaped spearhead ornamented with engraved lines. So they ornamented even their weapons. Here are some swords, and you can see the sax or single-edged sword on this side, and this is a damascened sax. Damascening is a technique that they learned from the Muslims. These are all single-edged swords. This one is bent. They bent them when they put them in their graves so that nobody else could use them, and somehow that had to do with magic. Okay, so weapons. And then here are some scabbards that the swords would be in. Again, embossed and silver-plated and very ornately done on this one. This one, I think, is just wooden, a scabbard for the sword. Here's a bridle made of bronze. So metalworking is just incredibly prolific in the area. But woodworking is also one of their major productions. Shields, this is a shield, and the shield usually had a wooden base to it. Why would they do a wooden shield rather than a metal one? Anybody have any ideas? Yeah?
Because of the weight?
Yes, exactly, because of the weight, because the wooden one was lighter and so easier to manipulate and handle. And so they would cover it with leather, maybe, to make it a little stronger. Did you have a question back there? No? Okay. And so here would be a wooden shield, and here's a pendant of gold, here's a saddle. All right, and so leather working they did as well. Here are some more weapons. These are bows and arrows. Here are wooden bows with notches at the end for fastening the string. Here is a wooden bow, and you can see the notch for putting the string, which would probably be rawhide, which would be strong and flexible for them to use. Here is an arrow shaft with the owner's mark on it, and an arrow point down here, if you can see the arrow point. Here is a part of an arrow shaft bearing a runic figure on it, and here's another arrow shaft. And so arrows, of course, were very effective weapons. Here are some more swords, and a sword, very ornate, a scabbard, another sword with a bronze handle. These are double-edged swords, and that would have been a Frankish sword. They sort of they imported Frankish swords or swords from Spain that were very well tempered and very well done in a kind of unfinished state, and they were mass produced, and when they got them they finished them and put the edge on them and finished the manufacturing process of them. We'll talk more about weapons later. I especially wanted to show you the quiver, and here is a wooden quiver. Here's a bronze mounting for a wooden quiver, and here are some wooden scabbards. So you can see the kind of bronze work and wooden work they would do with their weapons. What I'm trying to do here in this whole lecture for both of the hours that we're going to talk is to try to kind of get you really immersed in the Viking environment, you know, what it was like to be there and what kinds of things they had around them. So that's one of my goals tonight. This is a very nice exhibit of Viking tools. You can sort of see the proportions with this one. Here is this double-edged sword, an iron sword, and some iron axe heads here, some iron arrowheads. I'm not sure what that is, but you can see these arrowheads are very sharp, to a very sharp point. The Vikings wore chain link mail. Okay, as did all the other warriors in Europe at this time. And we don't know exactly when they started wearing chain link mail, but it was kind of like, you know, the links are hooked together. It's kind of like wearing a metal sweater, but it's very, very heavy. And this is the rule for the fighting men to wear chain link mail up until gunpowder was invented in the 14th or 15th century. That plate armor that you see and all that's a myth. I mean, by the time they used the plate armor, it was armor was out of date. It was like, you know, putting up a barrier where it wouldn't work, because the plate armor didn't work with gunpowder. It didn't stop gunpowder. And so one reason why the chain link mail was so useful for such a long time is it's a lot lighter than plate armor. Plate armor belongs to an archaic romantic period. This armor was useful and it worked. Okay, so this is the armor that they wore. Sometimes they had leather armor too. They would make armor out of leather. Here are the kind of boats they had. This is before they had sails, and the earliest boats did not have sails. I don't think the sails really got started until about 750. That's when the Vikings swarmed out of Scandinavia, and I think part of it was the sails and the improved ships. But the earliest boats and ships were small, and they were rowed. They didn't have sails. So here is a rock carving of them, and this is a picture of one of the early boats, a very small boat. This is the let's see, we don't have the name of this one, but it is a more typical boat before they had sails on their boats, and so these have oarlocks on them, and so they were rowed. You can see the seats going across here. Here are the axes, wooden handles and an iron axe. It's called a celt. It's kind of a hammer kind of thing. This is a tweezers. Isn't that interesting? A tweezers and an ear pick. And this is a wooden club, the kind of tools they had. This is interesting. It's a wooden scoop for bailing water. And isn't it interesting? They made it out of wood instead of metal. I can't think of why they would use wood instead of metal to make the scoop. But this is to bail the water out, because they did have a problem with water getting into the boats, and so they would have to bail whether it was a small boat or a big ship. Here we can see a close-up of the oarlocks, and this is the Nydam boat. The boat I just showed you was the Nydam boat, and here you can see the inside view of the stems of the Nydam boat and how they link it together with the woodworking. More iron work. Here are axe heads, iron axe heads. And here are some more tools. This is a rake. Obviously, you can see that it's a rake with the teeth of, teeth are about 9 inches long. Here's an ornament of bronze for a scabbard, and here are reins for a horse. Remember that they had domesticated horses that were very important to them. Here are some blacksmith tools. So you have iron tongs and iron pincers and a different kind of iron tongs. Here below we have a flat iron hammer of a peculiar shape, and these we don't have a description of what they are. They're tools of various kinds. These are weights of iron that they would use in scales, and they obviously have some kind of a symbol on them so they know what they are. Here's a wooden bowl. Remember that we saw on the ship that they used iron pots and they had wooden bowls. Well, this is the kind of wooden bowl that they would have on the ship. Okay, these are iron ferules. I'm not sure exactly what these are, but here is a wooden trough. They're not using pottery, they're using wood. Question?
Maybe one of the reasons they used wood for those tools on the ships is in case if they ran into rough seas, all the wooden tools would still float.
Oh, well, that's a good idea. Yeah, they would float. The wood would float. Also, it wouldn't break if they ran into rough seas and it fell down. Pottery is too fragile, I think, to take on the ships. But they didn't even seem to use pottery in their homes. They used wooden utensils, which is kind of surprising. They were very skilled at woodworking, and here are some heads of animals carved in the end of thick planks. And they're painted in various colors, and so we have these wonderful animals that they've carved. That's just a foretaste of what they find. Here are some fragments of various things that were found. Wooden fragments, wooden carvings here, and you can see the elaborate carvings. Here's another scoop for bailing water that is elaborately designed with an interlace, and part of a wooden chair, probably a high seat of a chief, very ornate with these animal heads on it. And here is a chair, such a chair that might have been carved for a chief. And a lot of these chairs survive, this kind of furniture. These are ornate for a king or an aristocrat, of course. Look at this wonderful scene of knights fighting. Horses facing the center figure here. So the wonderful decorated chairs of very ornate design. Of course, ordinary people would have not chairs as good as that. Also, wagons. Wagons were very common. In the Vikings, the Indo-Europeans invented the spoked wheels, and the Vikings, of course, used these spoked wheels and wagons, which they would harness their horses or their oxen to, and use them for transport of various kinds in the area. And they actually built roads out of stone as well. Here is a saddle, a leather saddle in one piece for the left foot. And so I'm not sure exactly how. Oh, it's a sandal. It's not a saddle. I'm sorry. It's a leather sandal in one piece for the left foot. Sorry, I thought it was a saddle for some reason, but leather working, and we'll see some things either. They domesticated animals, and dogs were domesticated around 10,000 BC, and there's evidence of dogs being domesticated in Scandinavia. They were wolf-like dogs, and the dogs were hunting dogs and companions and guard dogs, and they used them in various ways to herd sheep. They were herding dogs, and so all of these dogs come down to us today, trained in these various ways. The animals they domesticated were sheep, cattle, pigs, and horses. And these were originally domesticated by the Indo-Europeans, and the Vikings, when they left their Indo-European homeland, they took these animals with them, obviously, and they had them with them, and they raised them. And one of the interesting things about the Scandinavians is they were primarily pastoralists, that they herded a lot of animals, and they didn't farm very much. This might be because of the environment, that they tended to be much more herding of animals. Did you have a question? Yeah.
Didn't the Vikings have the heavy plow?
They might have. That is a guess of Archibald Lewis, and I think he's right. Apparently the heavy plow originated in the Slavic lands, probably in Russia, and my guess is the Swedes brought it home from Russia and the Vikings had it before it was in Europe. But they did plow, and the lands that they had were rocky and hard and tough northern lands, just like northern Europe, and so they would need the heavy plow in order to farm those lands.
Which would explain why there was a disparity in farming.
Yes, it would explain why originally they did so much more. But the land was difficult to farm. I mean, there wasn't very much flat meadowland to farm, except maybe in Sweden. There was more in Sweden than there was anyplace else. They seem to have domesticated ducks and geese for sure, and I'm not sure of chickens. I was trying to track that down today. I had a terrible time today finding out a lot of information. The things I wanted to know I couldn't find in the books I had. But I think they domesticated ducks and geese, And if they didn't domesticate them, they certainly hunted them. And I could not find out if they domesticated chickens. And I'll keep searching and try to let you know. Question?
I thought we saw some roosters in the drawings from last week.
We saw some fowl. We saw some birds. I thought they were geese. We'll look at those drawings again and maybe see if we can figure out what they are. They did cultivate plants, and the funny thing is, as I looked through all these books, and I went through about 6 different books trying to find out what animals they domesticated and what animals they hunted, and I couldn't find it. But these books concentrated so much on their agricultural development, and when you look at the big picture, they didn't do much agriculture. And I'll give you some proof of that in a moment. But the plants they cultivated were, first of all, barley. Barley was the most important grain because it grows in the northern lands, and rye and oats were second. Wheat they didn't cultivate very much at all because it's too far north to cultivate wheat. And so barley, rye, and oats, and especially barley and rye, they used for food and drink. Beans and peas they grew, and those are very important. They're legumes, and they're called, in England, they're called pulses. I don't know if you've ever run into that word pulses, but that's what beans and peas are. And they have a lot of protein in them, so that they're very good for your diet. They also cultivated turnips and cabbage and garlic and angelica. And I didn't look up angelica, and I can't remember what it is. I wonder if it's onions. But certainly wild onions grow in that area, but garlic for sure. The nuts they would have cultivated would be walnuts and hazelnuts, and there were huge amounts of walnuts, especially in the northern world. And walnuts are very good for you. That walnut oil is especially good for you. It lowers your cholesterol, right? So, and they have a lot of protein in them. So nuts are very good for you. Fruits and berries, the fruits and berries that they had available to them to grow in the northern lands were apples, plums, cherries, pears, and lingonberries. And those were the ones I could find. I really think that's about all they had in the northern areas. They grew a lot of grass, though, because grass was of immense importance for grazing and hay. They grew grass for their animals, and they herded those animals from the summer pasture to the winter pasture, and so that was very important. And maybe we'll look for a moment at these rock carvings, and here are some rock tracings of various kinds from Scandinavia, and this is a rock carving. These are, remember we talked about those suns last time, that you always see pictures of the suns. These are the suns. And then here are the boats, and here are horses with chariots, kind of like the Romans had. This would be the forerunner of the wagon. Before they invented the wagon, they had these kind of chariots. Okay, here are some more rock carvings. Again, this is a sun, and then we have these ships, these boats or ships. In this one, this is in Scania, and this is in Zealand, and they have people, sort of stick figures with a ship. And now we can see some of these animals. It seems to me that these are clearly dogs here. We were mentioning a minute ago. And boats, the boats are very clear. These boats seem to have dragon heads, don't they? This looks like a little goose or chicken, but it's got such a long neck, I kind of think it might be a goose. And then we see all of these people with their ships and just boats everywhere. Okay. Down at the bottom here, we see more boats that are just everywhere. Here is that sun sign again. People carrying boats so that they would carry them in portage from one stream to another. You know, the small boats that they would use to go up the rivers and lakes and streams. And down here, I think these look like geese to me. They look like geese to me. Whether they're domesticated or whether they're wild, we don't know, because all we have are these drawings, these rock drawings, and we have no explanation of them. You have to sort of guess what they are. Okay, we can look at this next one maybe, and we see, this looks like a cow. Don't you think that's a cow or a bull? And if that's a bull, that might be a cow. These might be sheep, possibly. Dogs. This looks like a dog. Or it might be a goat. They had goats. This looks like it might be a reindeer. This looks like a whole row of little boats lined up, and the boats of lots of different sizes. Here, this looks like kind of a snowflake, and this looks like a hunting band with their axes going out hunting. But down here, don't those look like ducks or chickens or geese? Yeah, question.
Yeah, going back to the reindeer picture that you had up there a second ago.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could mention if there was any sort of significance to the fact that reindeer is pictured head-on, whereas all the other animals are pictured in profile.
Beats me. I mean, I don't know. All we have are these drawings, you know. You have to figure out what they are, and archaeologists look at them and try to say, what are they?
I mean, if it is a head-on thing, is it possible that it's probably more representation and sort of like, I guess, an animal spirit versus the actual biological animal itself? So, I mean, I figure like with a shaman headdress and things like that, I mean, if you saw a shaman from the side, it wouldn't really be you wouldn't have a profile of an animal, but if you saw it head on in one of those drawings, it would look something like an animal.
Now that's an interesting question. Actually, there is a reindeer dance that they did in the north of England that is left over from Viking times that they still do today in some towns in northern England, and they put the antlers on and they dance as if they were reindeers. And so the Vikings probably did the same kind of dance, but we don't know. You see, there are no inscriptions with these drawings. All we have are the drawings. Yeah, question.
The other thing is that it might have been just kind of hard to draw a reindeer from the side and have it look like that, because up above there they had a picture of a moose that you could tell that those were, like above it, that really looked like a moose because of the wide.
I don't think they had moose. I think. Mooses. Aren't they a New World animal? I believe they are. They wouldn't have had them in Europe. But I think there are some other ones. Let's see if I have the time. Okay. I think I'll show you some other ones in a moment that will look like they're not head-on. Okay. Even though they domesticated some animals, hunting and fishing were still of primary importance. And the animals they hunted were deer and reindeer. There were red deer and reindeer that they hunted, wild boars, which can be very ferocious, hunting wild boars, which are huge pigs. Wild geese, they hunted bears. They also sometimes captured bears and tamed them, and they had dancing bears sometimes, but they hunted bears as wild animals, and they hunted wolves, of course, not to eat, but to protect themselves from the wolves. Yeah, They also must have hunted small games like rabbits and hare, and of course fur-bearing animals like mink and squirrel, and they would have eaten the squirrel as well, and they would have eaten rabbits and hares. They hunted minks and otters and seals and any fur-bearing animals that they could trade with the furs. They fished for herring and salmon and cod and whales, and especially when they got out in the Atlantic, they went whaling quite a lot. And I don't know if you've been watching the news lately, but Japan has been clandestinely whaling and pretending that they were doing scientific experiments with their whales, Now Iceland is going to do that too. They want to start whaling again. And one of the big treats in Iceland is blubber. And so I've never tried it, but the reports I've heard is that it's rather rubbery and very chewy, but it's one of the standard foods, the whale meat and whale blubber. And of course, various, we mentioned the ocean-going fish like herring, salmon, and cod, and then there would be many kinds of lake and stream fish like trout of various kinds. This kind of fishing was performed in the small boats and also in fishing stations. And so they would have sort of stations on the coast where people would go out fishing together. And there's a wonderful quote from the Laxdala saga that says, "Wise men thought it very important that people got along well in fishing stations because it was believed that men would lose their fishing luck if they quarreled." And as we're going to see as we go along, luck is a very important thing to the Vikings, and so they will do anything to maintain their luck. But once they cooperated on the boats while they were fishing because they didn't want to lose their luck. But once they got off the boats, the men fought over the division of the catch, the division of the stranded whales, and the burden of launching or pulling up the boats. Nobody wanted to do the dirty work, okay, which they usually have the slaves do that anyway. Here we have some wonderful pictures of hunting, and clearly this is a man hunting. You know, if you look at primitive peoples today, when they drew pictures of this kind, usually it was try to perform a little magic ritual where if you draw a successful hunt or you paint it, that somehow the magic would transfer to the real live hunt. And that's why they did the reindeer dance too, so that the magic would transfer to the hunt. And here we can see, these really look like dogs to me. That looks like a snake. Well, we have some boats up here for fishing, but this huge hunter is really prominent. What these little animals down here are, I don't know. They could be dogs, they could be rabbits, they could be deer, they could be any animals that the hunter is hunting. It's not clear what he's hunting here. Here's another picture of a hunt, and we have all of these hunters with their spears. Here they appear to be wearing these horned helmets. And they actually wore a helmet with a boar, which is a wild pig, a boar on it, as a magical helmet to entice their prey into falling on their spears, I guess. But here they are hunting the animals. Doesn't this look like a duck or a goose? This looks like a duck because it has a short neck. Here's a hunter riding a horse and he's throwing a spear. Here's a little animal that looks like a duck. This looks like a dog here. And you wonder if this is a kind of herd of animals that they're hunting, which would suggest reindeer. Down here. Here are a group of hunters, and these are mounted on horseback, and they've got spears. I don't know what these square things are they're holding, unless they're shields of some kind, but here are the hunters going out to hunt. Now, these animals are clearly reindeer, and here we have them from a side view, not from a frontal view, and so they could do them both ways. And so these are clearly reindeers. These might be female deers. This looks like a dog, maybe. Some of the pictures are quite difficult to figure out, but they look like dogs. Here's a snake. Obviously, here's another goose. My guess is that's a goose. And here are some more animals and ships for fishing and hunting. You can see here's a large ship with two smaller ones there, and this might be a warship, a champion defending his ship against attack. Here are some more tracings. This is a quite unusual one with this maybe a body being flung up in the air with warriors fighting a battle with ships, which they might have done in that early time. And then here are some more very odd pictures. We don't know what they are. I don't know what they are, I should say. And here are some more ships with, or ships or boats. This might be an octopus. Don't you think that might be an octopus? A squid. This might be a turtle. That might be a turtle. Here are some small, this might be a goat. Look at those horns, might be a goat. Okay, so so all of these ways they tried to get food. We've reached about the halfway point now in our exploration of the material culture of the Vikings. We need to take a little break for maybe 15 or 20 minutes, and when we come back we'll look at the food they ate, the clothing they wore, and the houses they lived in and the towns they lived in. And so that's what we'll do for the second hour. So come back in about 15 or 20 minutes.